Good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. Yep, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou. Live on LouTube for you. How y'all doing? It's Wednesday. Happy Wednesday. This is going to be the last video, the last chance for you to get your comments down below. What other teams do you want to see me do these types of videos on? I'm going through some bigger games for some of the teams in college football, giving you the spreads on those games that just came out over the last week. I've done several of these already. Tennessee, Ohio State, Colorado. I've done several of them. If you flip back through the videos, you'll see them. Up today is Texas. So I've got the odds pulled up over here. We're going to go through it. Not every Texas game is on here. Not all of any team's games is on here. It's the bigger games, the more important games, the more interesting games, that kind of thing. And some interesting tidbits about Texas' schedule I want to talk about in this video too. But let's get into it. Texas Longhorns 2023, an important year for Texas, entering the SEC next year. So this is their last season in the Big 12. They'd like to go out with a bang. We'll see if they can do it. They are the favorite to win the Big 12 in terms of odds, and I think they should be the favorite to win it. In fact, if I had to pick a winner of the Big 12 right now, I'd probably pick Texas. I'm falling for it, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. But I am higher on Texas than most other people. I think Texas should have a pretty good season in 2023. Does Vegas agree? Does the betting public agree? Well, let's go through and take a look at some of Texas' bigger games. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to sort of ruin the ending right here at the beginning. Texas is favored and will continue to be favored and is going to be favored in every single game they play this year, with the exception of the Alabama game. That's just reality, and you'll see as we go through, Vegas agrees with that. But the first one that they have listed here is Saturday, September 9th. So I believe, what is that going to be, week 2? They travel to Tuscaloosa to play Alabama. They're a 7.5-point underdog. Now, everybody remembers this game from last year. It was played in Austin, and most people came away from that game thinking Texas should have won. They looked like the better team for a large portion of that game. They had a lead for a large portion of that game. Bryce Young had an amazing drive towards the end of that game. There's that one play where he sort of ducks up under a sack and rolls to the right. We've all seen that a million times on the highlights, and Alabama comes away with a win. Quinn Ewers went down in that game, and Texas offense really sputtered after that. Quinn Ewers is back, of course. I expect this to be a really good game. Alabama is a different team at home than they are on the road. This has been a trend for Alabama over the last 2 or 3 seasons. And when you start to talk about Alabama or try to figure things out for them, Alabama last year played a lot of their tougher games on the road. Therefore, this year, a lot of their tougher games are at home. They get this Texas game at home. They get Tennessee at home. They get LSU at home. Those are all road games they played last year that they either lost or almost lost. So Alabama could be a worse team in 23, considering what they lost right off of last year's team. They could be a worse team in 23 than they were in 22, but have a similar or better record because they get so many other more difficult games at home. This is going to be a tough spot for Texas here early in the season. With that being said, a lot of question marks about Bama heading into this thing. Don't really know who the quarterback's going to be. The coaching staff appears to not be happy with either option when it comes to Jalen Milroe or Ty Simpson. So, of course, they brought Tyler Buchner in from Notre Dame. Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator, also came from Notre Dame. So some familiarity there between Tommy Rees and Tyler Buchner. We'll see which way they go. A lot of talk about Alabama getting back to sort of quote-unquote old-school Bama football, the whole run the ball, Paul, line of scrimmage, pound the rock, a lot more running as opposed to what they did last year, specifically with Bryce Young and the throwing the ball. They don't really have the group of receivers at Bama that they've had in years past. Drops were a big problem for Bama last year. Drops were a problem in the spring game for Bama this year. They don't really have a wide receiver that scares anybody. They just don't. Texas has a much better crop of wide receivers than Alabama does. It's not even close. Texas has 3 NFL wide receivers at wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, and wide receiver 3, loaded at wide receiver. Quinn Ewers has to have a good game, obviously, if Texas wants to win that one. I think that'll be a good game. Could Texas win that game? Of course they could. Of course they could. I mean, you can make a legitimate argument that Texas is a better team than Alabama heading into 2023. You can make that argument. But Alabama is still Alabama. Nick Saban is still there. Alabama is still the most talented roster, top to bottom, in all of college football. And if Alabama can get things going early in the season, they can win this game at home against Texas. You know, if they get the quarterback situation figured out, if it ends up Tommy Rees is a good fit there, they've got a new defensive coordinator as well. I don't have as many questions about him as I do Tommy Rees. Kevin Steele's the new DC at Bama. He's been a DC forever. He's been all over the SEC. He's worked at Bama under Nick Saban before. I think they'll be okay defensively in terms of the coordinator. I do have questions about Tommy Rees, but this is one of the biggest non-con games of the year here, Texas and Alabama. I don't care how much you love or hate either Texas or Alabama. It's hard to find two bigger brands in the world of college football than Texas and Alabama. This will be a huge game early in the season, September 9th. Bama right now, 7.5-point favorite over Texas. That's the only game Texas is going to be an underdog in. The Big 12, you know, last year it was kind of this same way. It appears sort of wide open, and that sort of, you know, that opens a path for a TCU and a Kansas State last year to sort of come out of nowhere, and that's who ended up playing in the Big 12 title game. Kansas State, of course, defeating TCU in that one. Texas and Baylor is the next one that's on here. Texas is an 8-point favorite on the road at Baylor. I think Texas will win. As far as the point spread, you can make of that what you will. Texas being favored by a little bit over a touchdown there over Baylor. Baylor had a good year a couple of years ago, fell off a little bit last year. I don't expect Baylor to be a team that competes for the Big 12 in 2023. I just don't. I think they're not going to be a terrible team. I think they've proven that. I think they're going to be a good team. I don't think they're a team. When I think of Big 12 this year, Texas is front of mind for me. I think Kansas State's going to be good again. The two wild cards in the Big 12 for me are Oklahoma and Texas Tech. And we're going to talk about both of those teams in a minute because Texas plays both of those. Texas plays both of those teams. Different scheduling this year in the Big 12 than what we're used to seeing in years past because, of course, the Big 12 has added 4 new teams this year, and they still have Texas and Oklahoma this year. So forever, right, the Big 12 had 10 teams. That's how it's been forever. And you played everybody in the Big 12, right? You played 9 conference games. You played the other 9 teams in the Big 12. Well, they've added 4, right? So that takes it from 10 to 14. So the Big 12 used to have 10 teams. Now the Big 12 has 14 teams? Is that right? How many teams do they have? You can't even keep up anymore. And then Texas and Oklahoma are going to leave, and then the Big 12 will have actually 12 teams, right? Anyway, as far as the 4 new teams go, Central Florida, Houston, BYU, and Cincinnati, Texas this year plays 2 of those teams. They play on the road at Houston and home against BYU. I don't think either of those games are listed yet in terms of the spreads and the odds, although Texas will be a favorite against both of those teams. But yeah, Texas and Baylor's the next one on here. Texas is an 8-point favorite on the road. I expect them to take care of business there. What's next up that they have listed for Texas here? Kansas. Leave your jokes down below about Kansas beating Texas 2 years ago, but Texas handled business last year and beat Kansas. Kansas was a fun story last year. They started 4-0, 5-0, whatever it was, but I think they lost 5 of their last 6 games or 6 of their last 7, something like that. So I don't expect Kansas to have some sort of miracle 10 or 11 win season. Are they heading in the right direction under that new coaching staff? Maybe. I still like their quarterbacks. I don't think they're going to be as bad as some of the just like terrible, god-awful Kansas teams we're used to seeing over the last 10 or 15 years. But they ain't got no business competing with a team like Texas, and Vegas agrees. Texas is a 17-point favorite at home this coming up season against Kansas. They should win that one without a problem. The Red River Shootout is the next one that's on here. Texas and Oklahoma played, of course, every year, neutral site game in Dallas, Texas, the Cotton Bowl, State Fair, that whole deal. Oklahoma has dominated this series over the last decade or so. Not last year. Texas absolutely humiliated them. What was it, 49-0 or something like that? Just an absolute beatdown. Not a good look for Brent Venables at Oklahoma in his first year there. You can say what you want about their record. It's the first year. It's his first year it was his first year there as a head coach, and it was his first year as a head coach anywhere. Right? Never been a head coach before, so you give him a little bit of slack, a little bit of benefit of the doubt in terms of overall record, learning curve. You know, a first-time head coach is going to make some mistakes here and there. I don't know that you can overlook and forgive 49-0 to your rival, Texas. I mean, that was just an absolutely embarrassing beatdown that the Longhorns put on Oklahoma. Oklahoma's going to want revenge this year. Of course, Oklahoma always wants to win this game. Dillon Gabriel comes back for them at quarterback. And while I don't think Oklahoma's going to have a top 10 defense in the nation or anything like that, I do think they're going to be a lot better defensively than what we saw last year 2 under Brent Venables. They still have some work to do roster-wise and talent-wise to get that defense to where Brent Venables wants it to be. I mean, they're nowhere near the level of talent at Oklahoma defensively than what Brent Venables was used to having at Clemson. It's just a country mile. They signed Jackson Arnold, who I really, really like as a quarterback in the future. But if Dillon Gabriel is healthy, I expect him to start every single game this year. Now, health is a concern for Dillon Gabriel. He was hurt some at Central Florida. He was hurt last year at Oklahoma. We'll see what happens, but I just think Texas is in a better position. I think Texas is further along to where they want to be right now than Oklahoma is. I mean, Sarkisian was hired a couple of years before Venables was hired. This is what, Sarkisian's 4th year? Is that right? I think it's his 3rd or 4th year. 4th year, I think. And this is only Venables' 2nd year. So Texas is just a little bit further along, a deeper roster. I'll let the Texas and Oklahoma fans argue amongst themselves in the comments about the starters and who's better, Quinn Ewers versus Dillon Gabriel, or the wide receiver, whatever you want to argue about. But when it comes to overall roster depth, 2nd and 3rd string players, which do play in games. I mean, teams rotate players in and out at certain positions, defensive line, wide receiver, linebacker, even to a certain degree. You see teams rotate players in and out. So your 2nd and your 3rd string does matter. Texas is further along there, I think, than what Oklahoma is. I expect Texas to win this game for the 2nd year in a row. If the game was being played tomorrow, I would pick Texas for sure. They're, according to Vegas, according to DraftKings, they're a 5.5-point favorite over Oklahoma in the Red River shootout. Let's see what's next on here for the Shorthorn man, for Texas. Texas is back again. I'm falling for it, though. I'm falling for it. I think Texas is back. Kansas State and Texas. Kansas State won the Big 12 last year, right? Beating TCU, who was undefeated. TCU was 12-0. They lost to Kansas State in the Big 12 title game. Texas hosts Kansas State this year. They lose Deuce Vaughn at running back. But again, Kansas State, I think, has one of the best coaching staffs in the Big 12. Now, that's not to take anything away from Steve Sarkisian and what he's doing or what he could potentially do in the future. Not taking anything away from Brent Venables. Not taking anything away from Sonny Dykes at TCU. There are some good coaches right now within the Big 12. The issue that I have with Kansas State is the same issue I have with a lot of teams that I sort of put in the Kansas State category. There are teams that are more than capable of having a good year, even a really good year from time to time, but they don't recruit at a level year over year to repeat those really good years year after year after year, right? There's a lot of different reasons why you see some of the same teams in the top 5 and the top 10 every single year, your Georgias, Ohio States, Bamas, Michigans, whatever. One of the main reasons is because they recruit in the top 5, 10 every single year, right? Your Kansas States, your TCUs, they don't do that. Minnesota and Northwestern in the Big 10 are a couple of examples. It seems like every 3 or 4 years, one of them wins 9 or 10 plus games. Just a lot of teams I kind of put in that category. So I think Kansas State will be a good team because I respect that coaching staff so much. I think they're going to get the most out of what they have there. But let's be real. The talent on Texas roster, it just blows away anything that Kansas State has. And at some point, and I'm either going to be an idiot or a genius. Maybe it's this year, but at some point, all that talent that Texas has is going to have to show up in the form of results on the field. And when you look at the Big 12 this year, it just kind of looks like it's Texas's year to win the Big 12. And I know right now people are typing, well, it's Texas's year every year. I get it. I know. They had the talent to win it last year, the year before, and the year before. So we'll see. But they're a 9.5-point favorite at home over Kansas State. And that sounds about right to me. TCU. So going right from Kansas State to TCU here. Texas plays on the road at TCU. Now, Texas is only a 6-point favorite on the road at TCU. They lose Max Duggan. They lose Quentin Johnston, their quarterback and wide receiver. Let's keep in mind about Max Duggan, though. He was a great quarterback. Had an amazing year. Second in Heisman voting last year. Came runner-up in the Heisman. He's gone and Quentin Johnston are gone. Quentin Johnston is going to be the harder of the two to replace, in my opinion. He is a legitimate NFL talent. You saw where he got drafted. Not that Max Duggan can't be successful in the NFL. Maybe he will, but it's more of a long shot for Max Duggan than it is Quentin Johnston. Max Duggan was one of the grittiest players. He reminds me of Cam Rising at Utah. These guys aren't the fastest, biggest. They don't have the best arm. They don't make the most accurate throws all the time. They just have like that it factor. He had that. But he was not the starting quarterback for TCU at the beginning of the season last year. He only became the starting quarterback because the real starting quarterback got injured And that quarterback that got injured, he's back. So that doesn't mean that he's going to be better than Max Duggan or have a better year than Max Duggan had. But it does mean that all the coaches on that team thought he was better than Max Duggan because they chose to start him over Max Duggan. So TCU could have a good quarterback again this year, but he's not going to have a Quentin Johnston to throw the ball to. And again, because of the recruiting, it's just much harder for a team like TCU to repeat a season like they had last year than it is some of these other teams that recruit in the top 5 or 10 every single year. Texas is a 6-point favorite on the road at TCU. What's next for Texas on here? Scrolling. I guess, is that it? I guess that's it for as far as the Texas games they have on here. Let me just make sure I didn't miss one. I don't think I did. There's Texas and TCU. There's Texas and Kansas State. Talked about those already. Yeah, I don't think I missed any. So that's all the Texas game. Texas and Oklahoma, we talked about that. Kansas and Texas. Yeah, I didn't miss any. Let me say something about Texas' schedule. I mentioned the additions to the Big 12, Houston, BYU, Cincinnati, Central Florida. It means there are 14 teams in the Big 12 now, so obviously you don't play every team, right? They're playing Houston and BYU this year. They are not, so they're not playing some of the other teams that they normally play within the Big 12. They are playing Texas Tech, the very last game of the season. If you're looking for a team in a conference to potentially make a TCU-like run, and I don't mean making the playoffs, winning a playoff game, and playing for a national title. I mean just a team that very few people are paying attention to heading into the season that could end up being one of, if not the best teams in that conference. It's Texas Tech in the Big 12. Texas Tech had a quiet but really good year last year in 2023. In fact, they beat Texas last year. This is the last game of the regular season in the Big 12. Texas at home against Texas Tech. It's possible Texas and Texas Tech play each other 2 weeks in a row. Texas Tech could be the best or second best team in the Big 12 this year. I think Oklahoma's going to be better. I don't know that they're going to be better enough to make the Big 12 title game, although it's possible. I told you at the beginning, Texas, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, Kansas State. I think your Big 12 title game comes from 2 of those 4 teams. I think Texas Tech is going to be a sneaky good team this year. Oregon State last year. No one talked about Oregon State last year. They go out, they win 10 games. That could be Texas Tech in 2023. I think they're going to be a really good team. Did they play Oregon early in the year? It seems like Texas Tech and Oregon play early in the year. Maybe I'm misremembering that. I know Texas Tech has a big non-con game against a good team early in the year. I think it's Oregon. And then they end the year. Well, hell, I can just click right here while I got it pulled up. So make sure I'm not getting it wrong. I get enough shit wrong. Yeah. They play Oregon. They host Oregon. Actually, they're going to play that game at AT&T Stadium. It looks like here. Jones AT&T Stadium. Is that Jerry World? So yeah, Texas Tech hosts Oregon in week 2, September 9th. That's going to be a huge game that no one is going to talk about leading up or during the offseason. Everybody's talking about Texas and Bama, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas A&M, Miami. You're not going to hear anybody talk about this Texas Tech-Oregon game. That's going to be a hell of a game. That is going to be a hell of a game. If Texas Tech beats Oregon early in the year, they're going to immediately start to show up on a lot of people's radar. They're on my radar now. I think Oregon's probably a little bit of a better team than Texas Tech, but the game's in Texas. You know, who knows what happens there. Bo Nix comes back at Oregon. But the point is that Texas, because this is a Texas video, let's get back to Texas. The Texas Tech game at the end of the year, the last game of the regular season, could be the biggest game of the year in terms of implications, playoff implications, Big 12 title implications. That could be one of the biggest games of the year in all of college football, certainly within the Big 12. Texas, Alabama, win or lose, let's keep in mind that has nothing to do with the Big 12 and who ends up making the Big 12 title game. The Big 12 does not have divisions. It's the 2 teams at the end of the regular season with the best conference records. Texas can lose to Bama by 100. I don't think that's going to happen. That's not what I'm saying. But regardless of what happens early in the year with that Texas-Bama game, Texas, I think, is poised to have a really good year within the Big 12. And I would be surprised at this point if Texas is not one of the 2 teams representing the Big 12 in the Big 12 championship game the first Saturday in December. Anyway, there you go. The Texas Longhorns. A look at some of their key games this year and what Vegas thinks about them in terms of the odds and the spreads. Again, You're running out of time. Comment down below. Let me know what teams you want to see me do a video like this about, where I highlight some of their key games and tell you who's favored, what the spreads are, and all that. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good morning.